Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this workshop being put on by the Los Angeles Congress of Neighborhoods. My name is Daniel Perez. I use he, him pronouns, and I have the fortune of chairing this year's Congress Planning Committee. We're very excited for the workshop that we're putting on today. We have some amazing panelists here to share their knowledge with you. I'm going to introduce our panelists in each section, and how the workshop is going to proceed is we're going to have 3 different panels today presenting on narcotics, gangs, and cybercrime in Los Angeles. At any point during the presentation, feel free to submit questions for the panelists in the chat window in Zoom, or if you're not watching on Zoom, feel free to submit questions to our email at info@neighborhoodcongress.la. And then after all the panel presentations have completed, we're going to have a Q&A section with all of our panelists. So without further ado, we're going to jump into our first presentation, which is going to be on narcotics in Los Angeles, featuring Dr. Sid Puri and Detective Art Stone. So I'm going to ask our other panelists to turn off their videos so we can feature those panelists. Detective Art Stone is a Los Angeles Police Department detective. He's been with the Gang and Narcotics Unit, and Dr. Sid Puri is the Associate Medical Director of Prevention, Substance Abuse, and Prevention and Control with the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Health. We're very pleased to be able to have these folks join us. Gentlemen, please take it away.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. I'm going to share a presentation that we did. Hopefully you can all see that. Again, my name's Sid. I'm one of the docs at the Department of Public Health and Substance Abuse and Prevention, and I had the great pleasure of working with Art Stone on creating this presentation that we're going to tag team and discuss important concepts of narcotics in LA County. We have a few goals for this very quick presentation. So if you have questions, definitely share, save them till the end and we'll make sure we answer them. I just want to make sure I highlight things, including the rate of substance use disorders in LA County, specifically for adolescents, describe opioids, their possible risk factors, including overdose, demonstrate an understanding of what fentanyl is, which is driving a lot of our current overdose epidemic, share information on other substances, including other kind of illicit substances that people may be using, and then discuss resources for those at risk. As a general kind of just overview, I want to make sure we understand the kinds of substances people are using and what their effects are and how a lot of them actually have kind of prescription parallels. So a lot of times we'll have patients who are using stimulants, and these are the uppers. So these are the things like caffeine and nicotine, but also amphetamines like methamphetamine, crack cocaine, and crystal meth. But we also prescribe medications in a similar class. And these are our medications that we generally use for conditions like ADHD, attention disorder, hyperactive disorder, things like Adderall, Ritalin, Vyvanse. As stimulants, they speed up things in the brain and the central nervous system. So they give you energy, they decrease your appetite, they make your thinking go a little more quickly. Again, when you're prescribed these medications, they work in the way that they need to, and you don't necessarily have a lot of the dangerous side effects that you do when you're getting them off of the street. Depressants are downers. So these are the things that slow down the brain, make us calm, sometimes put us to sleep, make us feel relaxed. These are things like alcohol. So all of your beers, your wines, your liquors, your opioids, your heroin, your fentanyl, and then your things like your cannabis and your marijuana. We prescribe things like this. So benzodiazepines are a class of medications we use. Xanax, Ativan, Valium, Klonopin, those are all, things we use generally for like short time periods for things like anxiety prior to surgery, or any kind of like things. We use them in the longer term for things like seizures. Opioids are our pain medications. So these are our prescriptions like Norco, Vicodin, Percocet, codeine, again, have specific, needs, and they fulfill a purpose when they're prescribed by physicians, but sometimes they can also lead to things like illicit use of heroin and fentanyl. And then finally, kind of another class of substances are the hallucinogens. These are things that kind of alter your state of consciousness, distort reality. They can create hallucinations, like you're hearing things, seeing things, feeling things that aren't really there. The types of things we generally don't prescribe, though. These are things like LSD or acid. ecstasy, MDMA or MDA, mushrooms, psilocybin, and PCP. And then ketamine should also be included here. And I know there's a lot of new research in psychiatry around classes like ketamine and psilocybin and their use in things like depression and PTSD. When you're in like a controlled, contained setting, monitored by a physician, that's a kind of a different story. These are things that people are buying off of the street and using recreationally. So what are they using in LA County? So this was super fascinating to me because it's looking at kind of what the adolescents are using in LA County. So we know exactly kind of what the landscape is. This was data from the California Healthy Kids Survey from 2017 to 2019, which is the most recent data. So it surveys about 150,000 public school students from 200 schools around Los Angeles County. I highlighted in the red arrows the things that I thought were, important for us to note because they're things that are putting people at high risk for things like overdose or kind of more serious substance use disorder. So cigarettes and nicotine are obviously things that our youth have a lot of access to, whether it's cornerstones or friends, corner stores, friends, or even parents. There's a lot of access to nicotine. So we know that, by grade 11, 23% of LA County public students that were surveyed here had tried electronic cigarettes. When we look kind of at the harder drugs, we have about 1% using heroin, but 10% using prescription pain medications, including things like Norco, Percocet, Vicodin, and then other prescription stimulant medication like Vyvanse, Adderall, Ritalin, again, probably given to them by friends or family members. And then also sedatives, which are kind of like the Xannies they're either buying off the street or from their friends. So 10% is a pretty significant amount for the prescription medications that are really concerning, especially because if they're not getting them from an actual provider, what Art and I are going to talk about is the contamination of fentanyl, which is a deadly contaminant now that's killing that has kind of pushed our overdose epidemic into a new level of seriousness. In addition to those things, we have about 1/3 of high school 11th graders using alcohol, and about 1/4 of them using marijuana. So this is kind of like, we know the general classes of substances they're using. In terms of when we look at substance use and abuse, so the previous slide was like the percentage of kids who have maybe tried it. Now we get into a more serious kind of like diagnosis where we know the use of any substance recreationally is now causing impairment in their lives. So maybe this is when they're not going to school, they're not going to work, maybe they're getting DUIs, maybe they're trying to sell, or maybe other negative things are happening due to their substance use. So when we look at youth age 12 to 17, the rate of prescription opioid use, again, causing concerning impairment, is about 3%. Illicit drug use is about, a little more. So like 3.2% for that, 2.8% for prescription opioid use. Substance use general overall is at 4%. This is concerning because LA County has a bit of a higher substance use disorder for adolescents compared to the rest of the state and the nation. So we know our kids are kind of primed to have a more serious effect of substance use disorders. The thing that we're, mostly concerned about right now are both kind of like opioids, but also stimulants. Because this is like a narcotic thing, I want to make sure we all understand what opioids are and how they work in the body. So two different terms. We have opioids and then opiate. The opiate is derived from the poppy seed plant. And these are your things like morphine, heroin, and codeine. Opioids are opiates, but they're synthetic. So they're created in labs. And these are your things like Vicodin, Percocet, oxycodone, and fentanyl. Basically, how they work in the body is, in general, we prescribe them for pain. So we know they're attaching to a receptor and then eventually blocking pain messaging throughout the body. In addition to kind of blocking that pain channel, they're also releasing dopamine, which is our neurotransmitter in our brain that really is released from the pleasure center and is released in massive amounts when we're doing things we enjoy and give us pleasure. So for example, dopamine is released when we're exercising, when we're hanging out with your friends, when you're eating something good, when you're watching TV, but it's released on a much more intense level when you have a prescription medication or an illicit medication. So maybe it's like, 100% released when you're having a really good meal or hanging out with your friends. It's like 800 released when you have an opioid. And that's why there's kind of like the drive to continue using something because it makes you feel good. So we know that it can, help both with pain, and that's kind of what it does, but it also has some other negative effects on the body. It can Besides pain, it can also cause constipation. Some people get nauseous or itchy on it, can decrease your energy because, again, remember, it's a downer, decrease your sex drive, and most concerning is it can decrease your breathing rate, which leads to things like overdose and death. That's in the short term. In the long term, it can actually cause an increased sensitivity to pain. So the more you take this medication, your nerves actually get a little frayed. So they actually don't get the full benefit from the medication in controlling your pain. If people are using this and their prescriptions get cut off, a lot of times people turn to things like street heroin or fentanyl. They can smoke it or they can inject it. If they inject it, they have risks for things like HIV, AIDS, infections in the blood, which can cause infections in the heart, and then withdrawal if you stop. And the withdrawal, not deadly, but can be very, very uncomfortable and can oftentimes lead to people wanting to use again, and then they accidentally overdose. So the main signs of opioid withdrawal are going to be restlessness, anxiety, sweating, cramping, a heart rate that's going very quickly, yawning, they can't sleep, and then they're a little shaky. So we prescribe them, right? And so how do we know that like they're not doing what they're supposed to? Well, when we look at overdose deaths in the US, we're seeing, we've had multiple overdose waves, and now we're kind of in a new one because of the synthetic fentanyl that's in a lot of our counterfeit substances. But when we look at kind of like the deaths per 100,000 in the population over the last 10 years, they're increasing, and they're increasing not only they're slightly decreasing from like the commonly prescribed opiates, because I think physicians are now much more careful in who they prescribe opiates to and for how long. But we're seeing the synthetic opioids, the fentanyl is really driving a lot of opioids. What's concerning is 80% of teens starting who had prescriptions for opioids start recreationally using them after they get a prescription. And so this is where kind of like as physicians and pharmacists too, we're trying to track how we can better prescribe and more safely prescribe things like a pain medication when someone really needs it, making sure we're prescribing Narcan, which is a rescue agent, whenever we do, and then also making sure parents, neighbors, anyone in the neighborhood knows exactly why this medication is prescribed. What we generally see is when prescriptions run out and people are getting a benefit from this medication, whether it's pain control, whether it's euphoria and that happiness, they tend to go to the street for other kind of like substances that may mimic that. And fentanyl is the game changer. So fentanyl is 100 times more potent than heroin, and it's a synthetic drug, which means it's created in the lab, and it works the same way heroin and every other opioid does. The problem is you can overdose on it very, very easily, to the point where this is why, it's being contaminated both in our opioids that are counterfeit, as well as our methamphetamine and other stimulants. And then any other substance you're buying on the street, you can just assume is going to have some amount of fentanyl in it. And that's kind of like, honestly, how I talk about it with all of my patients who are like, well, I'm going to buy this MDMA, or I'm going to get some ecstasy before I go to Coachella, before I go to whatever. And I'm like, you can do that. Know that there's probably fentanyl in there. So you do have a risk of dying. And we can't force people to do anything, but we can give them all of the information possible, make sure they're making an informed decision. Because essentially we can see on the left-hand side, that's the image of a penny, and that's the amount of fentanyl that needs to be in anything that you consume to cause death. When we look on the right, like the lethal deaths, the lethal amount of substances you need for a death are listed here. And so fentanyl is a sesame seed compared to a pea-sized seed of morphine, which, doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot still. And a sesame seed is quite just a little. Fentanyl's been in the news everywhere. We nationally started seeing it kind of more on the East Coast, and then it quickly transferred to the West Coast. In LA, I think last year during COVID, our overdoses went up exponentially around, I think, 250,000. And the Los Angeles Times reported how drug overdoses are surpassing 100,000 a year. And it's because of fentanyl. It's because this very dangerous drug is now mixed in every substance. And we have to be very careful on making sure the public is educated about it. The one thing that we can do, besides talking to patients and community members like you all here today and letting you know about fentanyl, is we can actually test things. So fentanyl testing strips are available online. They're pretty cheap. There's also places in LA County where you can get them for free. And essentially what you do is take whatever substance you're about to use, dip it, and then dip the fentanyl testing strip in it to see if there is fentanyl in it. It's odd in terms of kind of how it comes out. You would think that like a test would show a plus or 2 positive lines, like a pregnancy test, when something's there, but it actually does the opposite. It shows 1 line means it's there and 2 lines means it's not. So it's a little counterintuitive, but that's something you want to make sure you know when you're getting fentanyl testing strips. In terms of kind of like the impact of all of this on LA County, we know that people with substance use disorders are 2 to 3 times more likely to cause a lot of medical expenses for themselves, for the county, for the healthcare system. And so, we generally have about 2,600 alcohol and other drug-related deaths a year. And then it costs about $7.8 billion in hospital charges, in addition to kind of just like the hospital and kind of the pressure it puts on that. It causes drunk driving incidents. It causes a lot of legal ramifications from that. And then it causes about 8,000 injuries and about 300 deaths in drinking. And then, of course, whenever we talk about substances, we need to think about kind of law enforcement and incarceration. We know that it costs about close to $8 billion in substance use justice spending. So this is trying to help people either get incarcerated, pay for lawyers, or pay for ways to get out of incarceration or to go to things like residential treatment or other ways to kind of stay sober. And then we know that impacts things like their ability to work. And so people who have substance use disorders are twice as likely more to miss work, about 4 times more likely to have a workplace accident. And so all of these things not only kind of like put pressure on the county, but put pressure on our society and then families and individuals in general. So the impact is not only kind of like that person who's struggling with a substance use disorder, but it ripples. It ripples to their family, to their friends, to their jobs, to everyone essentially in LA County, which is why I'm so glad that you're all here today so we can learn how we can collaborate. How we decrease things. So from a public health perspective, our main focus is on prevention. So stopping someone from having a substance use disorder before they can. And this is like doing things like this, making sure people understand what substances are, how they can become addicted to them, what resources they need to know in order to get treatment if it goes that far. So, we invest a lot of money both in prevention. We invest a lot of money in how we screen patients. So this is things like going to their pediatricians, making sure their pediatricians are not only talking to the kids about substances, but they're talking to the parents. We know that substance use disorder is quite a heritable condition. And so if someone in your family has a substance use disorder, it's 40 to 60% likely that, or it increases the risk of a child or a first degree relative to have a substance use disorder by 40 to 60%. That's very similar to other chronic medical conditions like hypertension, diabetes, asthma, high cholesterol. So all of those things are very heritable. Narcan is something that we need to make sure everyone knows about. So Narcan is the rescue medication we use that reverses the overdose specifically from an opioid. So when someone is suspected of, not breathing, they're turning blue, and you think they may have used an opioid, this is a medication you're either going to inject in their nose or in a needle in their arm or any other part of their body and muscle, and it will take off the opioid from the receptor. And remember, when it's on the receptor, it's causing things like relaxation, sedation, all of those things that to an extent are very dangerous. And then they'll start breathing again. And so this is a medication that is legal available. You don't need a prescription to get it. You can get a prescription to get it, but pharmacists can hand it out. It's legal to hold on you. You won't be in trouble if you use it on someone, but this is a medication we need to make sure people know about. So essentially, if someone's overdosed, they're not breathing, you're like trying to rub them, you're like shaking them, you're like, wake up, wake up. Maybe they're choking and coughing. You put this medication in their nose or inject it, and then call 911, and they'll make sure they get to the emergency room. This is kind of how you use it. Depending on kind of if you have the spray or the injection. The spray is quite easy to use. You take it out, you put it in the nose, and then you just inject it, and it'll go into their nose and be absorbed. In terms of kind of what we do in public health, again, our focus is on prevention. So we do a lot of school-based, community-based, and public messaging around education, ensuring people understand risks of substance use disorder, signs and symptoms of substance use disorder. If it gets to the point where they need treatment, we support people going into outpatient, inpatient, residential. If they need assistance kind of with withdrawing from medications, we can arrange that as well. These are kind of the ways in which the public health department helps people get into services. So our SASH hotline is a 24/7 helpline where you can call and get help for anyone who needs a substance use referral. This is that number again. And then we also link people into kind of medications for treatment. And these are medications that will decrease withdrawal, decrease cravings, support them kind of like recovering, getting to the point where they're able to do things in life again. And I want to let Detective Stone as well talk kind of about from the legal perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. So just to pick up where Doctor left off, you're obviously hearing that fentanyl overdoses and the epidemic that we first knew as the opioid epidemic is what's really facing Los Angeles right now. I imagine most of the questions out there are related to that. It's important to understand the original opioid epidemic was the upper Northeast coast. That was the prescribing, overprescribing, pain centers, black market for what would normally be a regular prescription pill. But what Los Angeles is facing right now is the illicit fentanyl market. So when you see pills out there and when you hear that somebody's going to go buy Oxy or Xanax or whatever they're taking, that's not what they're buying. They're not buying the pill that caused the opioid epidemic that a pharmacy is creating that's got a mixture of the drug in it and then all the binders. What they're buying is a pill that's got a bunch of stuff that holds together a nominal amount of fentanyl. And you saw the example that the doctor gave you. It takes basically less than the tip of a pencil to kill you, and there's no way to measure that. So what Los Angeles is looking at now is the surge of fentanyl, whether it's major trafficking in kilo form that's sold to other people that break it down and put it into pills. It's mixed with heroin, it's mixed with cocaine, it's mixed to create a designer drug in clubs. We see a lot of overdoses that are related to cocaine, that fentanyl that people snorted that they thought was cocaine because they're an unwitting buyer, and they purchased something that what they thought was cocaine and they ended up taking it was fentanyl, and they took way too much and just overdosed. Next page, Doc. Some of the numbers for this, and this is all gathered through statistics from the police department, the fire department, and mainly the coroner's office. But in 2020, there were 2,357 drug caused deaths in total. 1,173 of those were fentanyl deaths. And in 2021 alone, we're expected to exceed those numbers by at least 60%. Some of the numbers that have come in between June and November clearly indicate that. In the 7-county area, that would be Orange, Los Angeles, Ventura, San Bernardino, Riverside counties, there have been 3,600 overdose deaths, and 2,100 of those have been fentanyl related. And that's just through the numbers through June of 2021. So that's going to be significantly higher. And we're definitely seeing trend on pace with that in 2022. Next page, Don. So what's LAPD doing about it? We have major narcotics teams that are out there targeting the traffickers, interstate and international. We have local narcotics teams that are working dealers that are dealing in your communities and your neighborhoods. But we're also out there talking to folks, doing what we're doing right now and trying to spread awareness. We work with the DEA a lot to let people know that what you're seeing in your home isn't the drugs of yesterday and what we warned our kids about. These kids are going online, they're using Snapchat, they're using Instagram, they're using whatever their online portal is to access drugs, and then they're being sold those drugs that are counterfeit and they don't really know what they're getting. So part of what we do is outreach with the doctor, with the law enforcement community, the judicial branch, talking to people about what to look for, how to deal with it, and how to deal with it as a community and as a whole. Next page. LAPD's efforts, they're kind of commensurate with the national effort. Our team in particular works with the DEA, and between August and September of 2021, the enforcement numbers alone, fentanyl pills, there were 1.8 million pills seized. I'll just stop there. You can read the rest of it, but it pretty much tells you what the major problem that we're facing here relative to the overdoses are. Now, there are overdoses that are caused by methamphetamine and cocaine and things like that, but the fentanyl is the one thing that you can't control. If you take a pill, you just don't know if it's going to kill you or not. That number of $1.8 million, though, to put that in perspective, we have one seizure in some photos that you're going to see here that was 650,000 pills alone in one house in the Valley in Sylmar just last month. You probably saw the news of nearly 1 million pills seized in the South Bay last month in one seizure. So those numbers do give you an idea of what's going on, but that $1.8 million could be just one seizure in one neighborhood that's being distributed in one part of Los Angeles tomorrow. And then what's important to remember, take all the same cautions. Watch what your kids are talking about and doing on their social media. Look for predatory behavior. Watch their phone usage. Be involved parents. Do all the stuff that they don't want you to do as a parent, watching and making sure you know what they're up to. Take advantage of the campaigns. DEA's campaign of One Pill Can Kill has a lot of information. But when you see that, follow up on it. It'll give you the new trends and tell you what you're looking at, and talk with your kids. And this is the most important part that I could stress, where we used to say, if you try marijuana, it could lead in a gateway sense to cocaine and this, that, and the other, and talk to them about what cocaine could do, how bad heroin was. You can't stress strongly enough what fentanyl and pills will do. And when you look at it from a kid's perspective or a new user's perspective, or somebody at a party taking something that they wouldn't normally take, it would be reasonable to say, hey, here's a half of one of these. Well, you look at a half of a pill that's less than 1/8 of an inch in diameter, how much damage could it possibly do? That quantity could kill you alone. So it's important when you're talking with your kids and your family and people that might be involved in this to stress that and say, any pill, anything you take that didn't come from the doctor could kill you. The doc couldn't have stressed it more. The naloxone, Narcan, every person should have that at home. I recommend everybody has it in their vehicle. You just never know when you're going to encounter something like this. And then educate yourself as to the effects of this. So if you feel it yourself and you see something going on, there are also other things that we talk about that the opioid epidemic and overdose crisis overshadow, and that's date rape and things like that. So educate yourself with regard to those drugs and the things that lead to ingestion, other than people who would normally use it or trying to use it themselves. And then I think there's legislation out there that's pending, if you look into it, with the Senate bill, Alexander's Law, that was posed by Murrieta lawmaker, that is recommending that the California Health and Safety Code be amended to add a charge for a distributor of drugs that distributes anything with fentanyl that causes death. They would answer for that death as well, and they face sentencing enhancements. Right now, the only recourse for that is a federal recourse or state laws such as manslaughter and whatnot that are very hard to prove. So getting behind those as a community and supporting that and asking your lawmakers to put laws on books that hold people accountable for the death they cause is very important. Some of the photos we're showing here, you'll just see them in order of, this is the typical drug paraphernalia. You can get this online, Google it, and you'll see everything that's here. All of this came from open source and was just plugged in to give you an idea of what's out there. With the drug paraphernalia, marijuana, it's legal. A lot of people are using it. You can't walk down a neighborhood street without smelling it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still a gateway drug, and it opens the door to reduce inhibitions and try other things. More serious drugs, the cocaine, you'll see some of the symptoms there, some of the things that the doc talked about, the way it affects the body. Methamphetamine is probably the second most peddled drug in our neighborhoods in Los Angeles at the street dealer level, just because of the price and the cost of it. Cocaine, obviously, you'll see that in party environments a lot, and then the counterfeit pills right there with it. Heroin, we're not seeing as much use, and black tar heroin is predominantly what's distributed in Los Angeles. You'll hear those old movie phrases like China White and things like that. That usually doesn't exist here in Los Angeles. If you're seeing heroin and people that you care about, typically you'll see that middle picture there with the colorful balloons in it. It's just small doses of heroin in a balloon. They pop it open and administer it the way you see here, and then you can see some of the signs and symptoms that go along with that. And that's about it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you both. As I'm sure we all recognize, this could obviously be a much longer discussion, but we don't want to cut into our next workshop, our next panelists. So I encourage folks, if you do have questions, we do have a Q&A section at the end. We've already gotten some great questions. Please submit your questions in the chat window, and we'll hold those for Detective Stone and Dr. Puri for the end. Thank you both, gentlemen. Next up, I would like to introduce our next panelists. First up, we have Stan Muhammad. Stan is the executive director and founder of the Helper Foundation, which I'm sure he will introduce. And we also have Detective Ryan Cooper with us from the LAPD Gang and Narcotics Unit. Gentlemen, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. I guess I'll go ahead and start. My name is Stan Muhammad. I am the executive director and co-founder of the Helper Foundation. We primarily deal with violence reduction, youth development from a community standpoint. We've been around for about 25 years. I had a desire to give back to my community in Venice after being in prison. Listening to the previous presenter, it just brought back a lot of memories because I am a recovered addict. I come out of a multi-generational gang and drug family. So all I saw growing up was those things that was presented. And it's pretty rough, man. I was telling somebody just yesterday, I'm so thankful that I went through that whole drug addiction process in the 80s, because I probably would have been dead if I was using drugs today. And it's pretty rough out there, man. So that was a beautiful presentation, but I'm here to lend my expertise as it relates to how do we deal with gang reduction, how do we intervene, and how do we prevent young people from being involved in the gang lifestyle. Thank you.
All right. I'm Ryan Cooper from Gang and Narcotics Division. In the time allotted, we really don't have enough time to really get deep into the details of everything involving gangs. But some of the questions that were kind of and topics that were sent to me from Daniel, from the moderator, just kind of an overview of what we have in LA. So I've been on the job for about 26 years, mainly work gang assignments. And I've seen the evolution of how our department's gone from enforcement to now we still have the enforcement, but have embraced the intervention prevention component. And really, the joke is, drank the Kool-Aid. We have, and we really have bought into it, and it's just part of our culture now. Quickly about the gangs, there's about 400 different street gangs, motorcycle gangs, organized different types of gangs in Los Angeles. We have every division in the city has a gang unit. So we have 21 different gang units. The gang units vary in their size depending on how much crime that they have. The types of gang, crimes that these guys are involved in vary. It's anything from what you'd expect, murder, attempt murder, rape, robbery, stuff like that, carjacking. Big one is human trafficking with some of the gangs where they're taking girls and doing the pimping and pandering. Identity theft, stolen vehicles, firearms. A lot of things we're seeing now is a lot of stuff with ghost guns that we're having. That's the big struggle we're having right now. One thing that was brought up is how do we deal with work it now with the district attorney's office and the city attorney's office and going after targeting gangs or tackling the gang problem, as the question was posed to me. Things have changed, and we're dealing with what we have to deal with. We used to have a gang enhancement. We're still a state law of 186 of the penal code, but it's not being used right now at the DA level. So we are still going out and, when applicable, arresting the gang members for committing the gang crimes. They're just not getting the gang enhancement on top of it currently. So we still work with the city attorney's office, still work with the DA's office, and the biggest push, like I kind of mentioned before, was getting the push towards the intervention and the prevention, and trying to steer the youth away from getting involved in these types of groups. There's the mayor's website for GRID is LAGRID, GRYD, so it's LAGRYD.org. It's a good website to check out. It shows you if you want to make a referral, or if you think your kid might be involved, or you're concerned about somebody in the neighborhood, to make a referral. Our officers are trained to make referrals. They do it all the time. It's actually something that's tracked, just like our crime statistics. It's brought up at our ComStat meetings. They want to know how many referrals are made by each division. And we work closely with the different GRID offices, or the different intervention prevention programs that are out there, to stop the violence and stop the retaliation when stuff does happen. So that's just a quick overview for me as far as kind of what we have in the city. Like I mentioned before, as far as the changing of our department, it used to be all about enforcement, and now we've really gotten into, if we do have to arrest somebody, we will, but the biggest push is to try and get the people some intervention, get some services prior to them joining the gang, or if they are in the gang, trying to divert them away. And Mr. Muhammad can talk about how they kind of mentor these youth, and up to 25 even, with some of these guys. But really quickly, as far as the intervention stuff, again, our officers go to training to understand. It's a full 8-hour training day to learn what is intervention, what's prevention, and understand what it's all about and what the purpose of it is.
So I think speaking into the prevention and intervention strategies, our agency is one of the GRID providers. Our service areas is the Pacific Division, which primarily covers Venice and Mar Vista on the west side. Some would say that there is no gang activity on the far west side, but there is. One of the biggest Black and brown disputes, some would call it a gang war, took place in Venice. A lot of bloodshed, a lot of people died, and a lot of people is in prison. Our strategy is to identify the most vulnerable youth or young adult that's in that life. It requires a special service, a special technique. There's a term that we use in the intervention world called the LTO, which is the license to operate. This terminology was formed at Pat Brown Institute during the time that we had our first wave of professionalized training, led by Tony Massengale and Howard Hewler and Bill Martinez. We created this terminology because we was finding out that it requires specialized services and individuals who have the ability to really go after the guy with the gun. I can't walk into South Central LA and work with gangs. I'm not from South Central LA. I can walk into Venice and deal with Venice, but I'm not from South Central. So what happened is we created this terminology, and I started identifying who got the strongest LTO in certain parts of the city. I want to give a shout out to Tony Cartness, who brought over 30 of us together, the best minds that was doing intervention and prevention without it being even called that, brought us together, created an ad hoc committee, and we ultimately came up with a definition that's now federal law, the effective community-based gang intervention definition. When we developed this definition, we did it because there was a lot of people in the city of LA and throughout the county claiming to be doing gang work, peace work. But what we found out is a lot of guys were still with one foot in, one foot out. And it damn near sunk the whole ship. it wasn't for Connie Rice, I think the ship would have been sunk, because a lot of us is former gang members and some of us has been in prison. So given the opportunity to come back and now serve the population that we come out of, not only is it very rewarding, but it requires a special type of service. And so what we do in terms of strategy is we identify through our community intervention workers, CIWs. These individuals is from these neighborhoods across the city. They have been chosen specifically for the reason that I just mentioned, the LTO to operate. These CIWs are responsible in some cases for up to 25 youth. Out of that 25 youth, maybe 3 to 4 of them is the ones that's toting the guns. Law enforcement knows that in every gang, it's not everybody that's shooting at everybody. It's less than 5% across the board. And so the CIW have to handle those individuals with the guns, but more importantly, they also have to identify individuals who is really not trying to be a killer. And what happens when we identify, we have what we call a family case management strategy, where the CIW will hopefully get that individual over to a family case management model. This family case manager is responsible for doing a full wraparound on this individual. What I mean by that is making sure once they do the assessment, making sure that every known resource is readily available. And when I tell you some of the stories, man, some of the transformations and alternations that have taken place, yes, we know crime is up. Yes, we know it's really drugs that's really driving crime right now. But there is some individuals who have made a complete 360 across the city of LA because of the family case management model. And it's our responsibility as a grid provider to maintain up to 50 young people. And the prevention side is a younger generation, but these younger individuals really is coming out of a in some cases, generational gang and drug family. They may have cousins and uncles and brothers and sisters that's involved in the life, but we try to run an interference. And the way we do it, it goes back to that LTO. When we run interference with individuals who have family members as gang involved, we really have to get the permission in some cases. And a lot of the older gentlemen don't really want to see their nephews involved in the lifestyle, because all of us on this panel today know ultimately the end result. Okay, it's either prison or death. And there is no other way out of this thing. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And so our approach, of course, when we first started, we had a difficult time with law enforcement because we looked at law enforcement as the individuals who put us in jail. Okay, but I'll tell you this, after really learning the importance of having an understanding with law enforcement, we now have a degree of understanding on why law enforcement is important to this work. And just like Officer Cooper just mentioned, they also have an understanding now on why intervention and prevention is important to community-based public safety. So with that being said, I'm going to open myself up to any questions. I guess we do that at the end because we can be on this for a long time. I will say this in my closing remarks to this piece here. There was a time where the work that I do was not well liked, rightfully so, because coming out of that environment, some people have already drawn a conclusion that once a gang member is always a gang member. Well, we had to fight against that because that's the opposite from the truth. People have the ability to change. And what you see here on this panel is an individual who made the commitment to change. It took prison, okay? It took me being inside of a prison cell, but you're now looking at a changed individual, and there's so many more like me out there. So we just gotta keep working, man. And so thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to share my perspective as it relates to gang prevention and intervention. Thank you.
Okay. One thing I'd like to follow up with another topic that was brought up was what can you do as a community member to possibly, you see somebody that's in trouble. It could be a family member, or one of your children. They're getting influenced, a neighbor, or something like that. Different options that you have. You have that website I told you about, the lagrid.org. You can reach out to the different organizations that are out there, and they can point you in the right direction of, hey, this is what we can offer, or whatever. Talk to your gang unit. Speak with each gang unit also has a gang detective, at least one detective assigned to them. Say, hey, this is what's going on. We want to try and see if we can, help this kid out before he goes down the wrong path. Sometimes we do get these referrals where it is, like Stan was saying, the uncle, second generation, third generation, gang family, and they're like, hey, we don't want this for my nephew or for my son. I want him to, get straight or whatever. Reach out to the gang unit. It's not like the days of in the past where it was all about, just arrest your way out of the problem. It's more about having an open mind and taking a different approach to, tackling the problem. Like I said, if people need to go to jail, they go to jail. But if we can get services for them, then we can get services for them. That was pretty much the topics that were brought up that Daniel wanted us to cover. I don't know, Daniel, is there more items you'd like to expand upon? I know we still got some time.
I do see a question, Daniel. I want to respond to it here. It says from J.A. It says, with the increase of gangs and drugs, can you, Mr. Muhammad, point to some success stories of your program in order to put a positive spin on what can be done? There's so many of them. I will refer you over to our Instagram page, Helper Foundation _. And I will refer you over to our website, which is helperfoundation.org. One particular story I'll share. This young man come out of a multi-generational gang family and drug family like myself. I approached him about maybe 4 years ago, maybe 5, at a local event in Venice, and asked him how was he doing. He said, man, I'm trying to find my way. I'm headed back to church. I'm tired of living this life. The very next day I had a meeting with him, and to make a long story short, he is now our lead community and venture work in the city of Venice. His name is Ebay Williams. Young man, beautiful soul, beautiful spirit. But he lived a lot of his life, gangbanging. And now he is teaching yoga, okay? He runs a class over in LA where he's teaching yoga, a gang member teaching yoga, imagine that. So you might see some of that on our website, but I just wanted to put him out there. He's our lead CIW full-time with benefits. Great story.
Thanks for sharing that, Stan. I have some other questions that I've received that I definitely want to get to at the Q&A section after Christina's presentation. But before we jump to Christina's section, I'm wondering, Detective Cooper and Stan, if you can talk a little bit about gang recruitment and the warning signs. You gave some pretty good resources about referrals and what to do if you're worried. What are some of the tactics that gangs use to recruit people into gangs? What are the warning signs that people should be looking out for their loved ones? Can you speak to that?
I would say that from my perspective, gang recruitment, it depends on the geographical location of where the gang is at. It depends on the young people who have opened themselves up to the potential recruitment. Gang members is not just going to recruit anybody. So depending on what area the gang is operating out of will indicate how they recruit. There is something that's called being jumped in. But again, that's not across the board. You have a lot of young people who, may just grown up in this type of environment and never really had to be jumped in anything. They just take on the identity. You have some who is not from the community, but have found themselves kicking in and hanging out with individuals that's from that community. And then before you know it, here come a jump in. I'm dealing with a situation now from a county perspective up in the Antelope Valley. I'm going to be meeting with a mother tomorrow, and her son is 14. Lost his big brother, Hoover. Luckily, I had a peacemaker out there that gave this woman, I've never met her, but I'll meet her tomorrow, gave this woman my number. Her son was just recently jumped into a Watts gang, but he lives in Lancaster. So look at the distance here. I'm hoping to run a strong intervention tomorrow because she's very concerned that she can lose her son. But we've already put calls out to the peacemakers in these areas, and we've already put his name out there, and we hope to be able to run an intervention starting tomorrow. And if he accepts, then we're gonna partner him with a case manager, because we also do services in the county through the Office of Violence Prevention. So there's different tactics and strategies, and one of them is a jump in.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on what Stan had to say, I agree wholeheartedly. It depends on what part of the city you're in. There's some places where these kids are trying to walk to school and they're getting harassed, and you better, they're getting, beaten or stuff stolen from them. Hey, you got to join us. You got to join us. It depends on the gang too. It's not like a boilerplate as far as, this is what you got to do to join a gang. Some gangs say we want numbers. Some other gangs are, I'm going to recruit this kid because he can benefit us somehow. He can bring something to the table. It kind of depends on, again, like he said, what part of the city you're at, kind of who you're dealing with, signs to look for if you're concerned. It's not like the central casting call, for Hollywood making a movie about gang members. Not everybody dresses down. Do some dress down? Yeah. Some have very distinctive styles. Some dress like, look like a bunch of skaters, like a bunch of guys you see at the skate park or whatever, and they're a hardcore gang. Some guys dress like, they don't have the typical shaved head and, baggy pants and whatever. Some people think that, guy's got to be a gang member because he's got baggy pants and, white shirt, or whatever the case might be. It really varies. And so it continually evolves. We've had gangs that, like one particular in the Valley that started off, they didn't dress down at all. They were just totally under the radar as far as, standing out, just by, observing, visually. And they were pretty hardcore, still a very hardcore gang. And they've evolved. They went through the, dressing down phase. Now they're kind of back to a little bit of, 1 foot in, 1 foot out as far as the dressing down. So it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, and that's why it's best, if you're concerned, reach out to the intervention unit, your local grid provider, depending on where you live in the Valley. It's not as readily available. I mean, there are a couple programs in the Valley, but it's not like other areas where you might have 2 or 3 different programs. Reach out to the gang unit and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Should I be concerned about this? It's better to reach out than to wait too long until something happens. I mean, we've had kids as young as 10 years old that are joining up. And people, I've sat on different panels and stuff, and people are like, 10 years old, there's no way they can be a gang member. It's like, well, they're out. Sometimes, unfortunately, they are doing stuff. They don't know any better because they're being influenced by older peers, or they have nobody to look up to. So they're looking up to these older kids who look cool in the neighborhood. So they start following their lead and doing stuff, not realizing the consequences of it. So.
Thank you. The last question, I think, will take us to the 3 o'clock mark, and then we'll save the rest of the questions to the Q&A, is talking about types of crime. I think you mentioned, Detective Cooper, Stan, you as well, there's plethora of crime that are committed by gang activity involved individuals. You mentioned ghost guns, Detective Cooper. Can you talk about what that is for people who aren't aware and how those are involved?
The ghost guns are they're non-traceable. They're basically built with 3D printers, and just put together with different parts, just put apart from here, stuff off the internet. And that's something that's become a big thing is, you can't trace them. You don't know where this gun came from. It wasn't registered to anybody. There's a lot of them. And you're not talking like just little, 380 types and just 9mm. You're talking full on, assault looking weapons. So that it covers the whole range as far as types of weapons. I think, besides the weapons, one of the biggest things is the human trafficking, the pimping and pandering. Last year, I was working on a project where we pulled every arrest report we had for when somebody was arrested for pimping and pandering. And it was almost the same MO with these guys. And there were guys that were pimps, that were gang members up in Stockton, up in Merced. We're down here in LA, we're down in San Diego, and running girls here in Los Angeles. And just the different tracks and these girls, young women, were vulnerable, almost the same kind of background, usually from foster homes or different facilities where they would meet these guys or get in touch with somebody. It was very sad. It got to the point where I could only read a couple a day because I couldn't read anymore, because it was just it just breaks your heart. Those are the real victims right there. They just don't know any better, and they're just being treated like an animal. And it's just sickening when you see stuff like that. So not that the victims of the robberies and the attempted murders and the murders and all that is not to say that's not important, but especially these girls are going to be traumatized for the rest of their lives. So
well, I think that makes the work that we're doing today and bringing awareness of the resources that Stan, you're providing at the Helper Foundation, and you're making us aware of it, GRID through the mayor's office, is all the more impactful. So thank you, Detective Cooper. Thank you, Stan, for your presentation. We have more questions that have come in for you both that I'll save for after Christina's presentation. But at this time, I am going to pivot over now to Christina Toussaint, who is one of the supervising assistant city attorneys in the office of the city attorney, the LA city attorney, to do a 30-minute presentation on cybercrime in Los Angeles. Christina, thanks for being with us.
Great, thanks for having me. So, as was mentioned, I oversee the Consumer Workplace Protection Unit, where we prosecute both civil and criminal cases involving sort of a wide array of consumer fraud. I would say cybersecurity is a big issue that we see that touches really a number of different types of consumer protection issues. So I'm going to go through and sort of explain kind of what are the kinds of cybersecurity risks that are out there, talk about some examples, and then really close at the end talking about kinds of things you may be able to look out for, or things you might want to do. So should you be concerned about cybersecurity? How serious is the issue? In 2021 alone, there were 6.9 billion in losses just from internet crimes. That was up 7% from 2020. To put the numbers of victims in context, we're talking about 847,000 reported losses as part of that. And again, these are really serious losses that usually include quite a bit of money per person and can lead to some very serious long-term consequences. So when we talk about cybersecurity, what are the different kinds of cyber issues that are out there? What are the catchy new phrases, the ways we refer to those? So there's things called phishing, there's whaling, there's farming, and of course there's ransomware and malware scams. So what are all these types of cybersecurity concerns we need to have? Phishing is really a name for the impersonation of a business or individual. And, it's got a couple of different names now that are sort of sub-names to that. One's called vishing, and that's when they're impersonating someone through a phone call, through a VoIP or a regular phone. Phishing is through an SMS text, so text messages that impersonate someone. And farming is where they direct you to a fake website. So you think you're going to website to buy, an Apple's website to buy an Apple product, and instead you're going to a fake website set up by a scammer to collect your information and your data. As an example, the types of text messages you might see that are phishing messages could be something like, we suspect an unauthorized transaction. To ensure it's not compromised, just click the link below to confirm your identity. Then when you click that link, you give personal information, which can then be used for identity theft and to compromise your device or to engage in sort of standard identity theft. Other ones say things like your account might have been overcharged. Call us to receive your refund. So often it's either a inducement that click on here and you'll get something that you want or that you like, or some kind of a scare tactic of, oh, we've identified a problem with your account and we're going to help you out. There's another thing called whaling, which is where a scammer will target a business to get confidential business or employee information. So these are larger victimization can happen in this way with whaling, because of course once you breach a company's database, then you can obviously get a lot more information that can be used for a variety of different scams than if you're just doing a one-off with individual consumers. Of course, there's also ransomware, which is a software that can take over your computer. It's also referred to sometimes as malware. With ransomware, you'll see an effort to take over a computer. This happens with individuals, but it often happens with corporations or larger entities. And in those cases, the ransomware is something where the company will have all of their data or most of it sort of encrypted, and the scammers will require them to pay, often via cryptocurrency or some other hard to trace payment method, in order to get access back to their data. And there have been some pretty significant ones, including hospitals, some kind of and energy companies, things like that. So those can be quite serious. So when we talk about these numbers, what are we looking at here? This is through the IC3 website. This is the FBI oversees this website, and it includes complaint statistics that are reported to the FBI through IC3, as well as through other agencies that report into IC3. And you'll see here that the numbers for phishing, smishing, and farming, as we talked about, these sort of ID theft related cyber threats, are way up. In 2021, you can see the number is up at over 323,000. And if you just go back a couple of years, if we go to 2018.
Sorry, Christina, interrupt real quick. Are you sharing your screen right now? Are you?
Yes, you're not able to see it?
We're not seeing anything right now.
Oh no, well that makes this much less interesting. Okay, hang on. Yeah, well, there you go. Thanks for telling me. See, I'm wasting all of these really nice slides. Okay, all right, here we go. Okay, how about now?
There, we see your screen now.
Okay. Oh, you should have stopped me earlier. See, I can just go on and on. It's okay. You didn't miss anything too exciting. Okay, sideways. Okay, so let me just go to the, let me just slip. All right. Okay, so now everybody can see that. So this is just a sort of a comparison of kind of the numbers that you'll see, and you'll see back in 2017 and 2018 we were as low as 26,000, and now we're up at the 300,000 mark. So it's been growing exponentially, and obviously with social media, obviously those attempts can be much more in depth and are happening much more frequently. And then this also shows for business email compromise, losses of 2.3 million. Again, these are nationwide, but business email compromise is again another form of this where somebody will break into a business's computer through, as we were talking about, whaling or some other way, and take the information, pretend to be a business, and engage in some kind of a scam, pretending to be the CEO or somebody from HR or somebody else, and then using that as a way to steal information or money from others. Unfortunately, California has the honor of being at the top of this list, which is not where you want to be. We are, of course, one of the largest states, but sadly also one of the largest sort of victims of these types of cyber crimes. LA itself is also pretty high up there in terms of cybercrime victimization and fraud. You'll see here, this is LA, Long Beach, Anaheim. Imposter scams are sort of at the top of the list of the fraud categories reported to the Federal Trade Commission. imposter scams here, over 10,000. Of course, there's online shopping complaints, investment-related scams, job opportunities, and other internet violations as well. And of course, credit bureau violations and other things related to debt collection. But again, unfortunately, LA is not an exception to the sort of large increase in cyber crime and cyber violations and targeting. And of course, these are only a fraction of probably the number of real victims. These are people who were victimized and then made a complaint and found the right agencies to make the complaint to, and then were included in the database. We also see sort of some differences in terms of age, as you would expect. So we find that sort of younger generations tend to lose less money, likely because they sort of have less money to lose. But sadly, most recently, there's been a trend where actually the younger generations are actually more likely to become victims of scam than seniors, which is something I've never seen. I've been doing this kind of work for 24 years now, and I haven't seen that before, but sadly that has switched. And although younger generations lose less money, there are more people losing money than before. So you'll see sort of 80 and over is losing up to $1,800, and the sort of 20 to 39 range are losing in the $550 to $600 range. But also we're seeing lots of people with those losses. We're seeing losses through cryptocurrency for younger groups, and we're seeing through social media contacts as a way to create victimization. So again, with the wonderful things the internet brings, it also can bring a lot of potential harm and danger to those who feel comfortable and are used to now communicating, making purchases with people they've never seen, people they've never spoke to, and that can create a situation where you end up becoming victimized because you really don't have. You have no idea who's really on the other end of that conversation. The other things we're seeing are, of course, increases in larger data breaches, corporate data breaches. You see them all the time. You see notices online. You see major companies. T-Mobile had one recently. Of course, Experian had one years ago. There are a lot of different breaches that happen on a regular basis. But sadly, the numbers have been increasing. Number of data breaches are up, for corporate data breaches, up more than 68% in 2021, which beat a previous record in 2017. So, and again, 92% of these were in 2022 were actually the result of cyber attacks. So we're seeing this as a real issue. And the phishing, again, the targeted attacks where they try to, learn information about you and send you a targeted attack. They may know you bank with Bank of America, and so they send you a targeted attack as if it's Bank of America to try to reach you in that way. Or of course, ransomware, they've sent you some kind of an attachment, you've clicked on it, you've downloaded malicious code, and now they have access to your computer and they can use that to engage in breaches. And at the corporate level, if that happens within the corporate database, you have an employee who does that, then that creates a situation where you have a much larger exposure of records. It's not just one person, it's a much bigger issue. So of course, major credit reporting agencies have experienced these breaches. One there was a breach for 147 million people. There ended up being a litigation on that from government agencies. They paid over 400 million in that case. They also had to offer credit monitoring to people who are victims. We've also seen large retailers become victims of data breaches. There was one that affected 41 million consumers' accounts, which had both credit card and contact information for more than 60 million consumers. So that's a situation where you as a consumer don't necessarily know this is happening, and you may have your data breached because the vendor you utilized had a breach on their end. And so really you need to think about, well, if I am the victim of that, what do I do? And you may get notice of that sort of online and to watch things in the news. There are, nonprofit organizations. You can go to their websites to get data on the sort of the latest breach. Sadly, although they happen quite frequently, unfortunately. But being able to keep track of your credit, going to annualcreditreport.com, which is a free government site that will allow you to check your credit 3 times a year for free from each of the different credit bureaus. and being diligent and checking your credit card accounts, making sure no new accounts are open without you knowing it. Those kinds of things can really help protect yourself when, again, you may not have done anything to have caused a breach, but you could have been victimized. And of course, if the companies offer you credit monitoring or other support, certainly a good idea to take advantage of that as well. But be diligent. You can also put fraud alerts on your accounts, on your credit on your credit account. You can come up with a freeze. So, for example, they have to call you if there's going to be a new credit card or something else open. They need to make a phone call to you. Those are all options to consider in terms of protecting yourself from those situations. So ransomware is a sort of a similar thing, but still different. The FBI again saw over 3,000 complaints on this, with more than 42 million in losses. We've seen it with companies, including even nonprofits, that have been victims of ransomware attacks. People will get their PI, personally identifiable information, including sometimes credit information. If you've given social security numbers out, which we encourage you to do very sparingly unless you really, really have to, or other data points, that information could be breached, and you want to just be careful first about who you give that information to. But if you do understand that a group you worked with had a ransomware attack, again, the kinds of things I talked about watching your credit and keeping track of what's appearing about you online, are all really important. We also see, scammers follow the trends, sadly. So with COVID-19, we did see some targeted phishing attacks related to those situations. So, for example, fake CDC emails, which could deliver malware, ransomware. So people think they're going to click on a link or an attachment to get some useful information, and it could actually be ransomware type of things, phishing emails talking to you about cures, benefits, information, data points on COVID. Again, we've seen some of that. Of course, there separately can be fake treatments or other equipment claiming to be FDA or EPA approved. We did file a number of lawsuits on those issues from the city attorney's office during COVID. And then, again, these emails or others could be selling you products they claim to be great sanitizers, especially when there were shortages, or PPE, mask respirators, that may not actually be legitimate products. So you do want to be careful making purchases, again, especially from sources you don't know. Looking at the CDC's website to see if these are legitimate products, checking with FDA and EPA. These sanitizing products really do have to meet certain requirements in order to be able to make certain claims. And the EPA has a special list called List N related to COVID that you can look at. But again, just being cautious and aware as you're making purchases, you're dealing with people and companies you don't know, be aware of that. And again, if you're concerned about, you've been a victim of a purchase of a counterfeit product or other things, you can also go to IC3 and report that as well. So talking about targeted attacks, there are different kinds of scams we've talked about. We put them in sort of a couple categories. One we kind of refer to as scareware, right? So these are ironically exploiting your fear of being victimized. Something really, to add insult to injury, they're going to protect you from being scammed by, in fact, actually scamming you. The other things we've seen are tech support scams, where they're posed as Microsoft or Apple to break into your computer. I think those may be a little bit, those may have tamped down a little bit. There was a huge case. There was an overseas call location that was doing a lot of these tech support scams that got shut down by the government. And so I think there's been a little bit of a decline, but it is still something to be aware of. In 2021, the tech support amount losses were 347 million, which was an increase over 2020. Again, even despite sort of shutting down some of these operations, the numbers are still really high. It actually, one of the cases the FBI pursued had subjects working overseas in call centers, and they connected with over 15,000 victims and had over 7 million in losses. And so, people need to just be aware that these things kind of are out there. And, like I said, there have been some successes, and that one center was closed down. But, all day long, those calls can unfortunately sometimes get them to get people to agree with it. Or what sometimes happens with the tech support scams is they'll go into your computer, they'll say, oh, pay us $300 and we'll fix your problem. You had a pop-up come up. And then what they do is they leave behind malicious code. And so they wait a while and then they activate it. And so then you get a new notice that there's something wrong with your computer. So you call the same tech support company you called before and you pay more money to fix the problem with your computer, which is actually something they just created. So that is something that we know does happen. And that happens with a number of scams. Once you've been a victim, you're sort of on a list. And so they have the rescue scam, oh, we heard that you were a victim of this scam, let us help you. And it's the same person who scammed you or their friend who runs the rescue scam. So those are out there. There's an example of a malware email, offering free pizza. And instead of getting free pizza, you actually were going to click the link and you weren't going to get a coupon. You were actually going to end up getting malware. And you don't really know for sure that it's going to be malware, right? It's not like it immediately alerts you or your computer, sort of self-destructs. They can get access to your computer and then begin controlling it, watching your emails, seeing what you're doing, sending emails from your account. There's a lot of things that can happen you won't necessarily know about because it's happening in the background. This is a real estate scam that is pretty serious. So this is a targeted example of a targeted email where somebody's offering to buy a house, which sounds fantastic, and there are some documents to click on, but the link is actually a malware link, and so that real estate company is going to get infected with malware. And then, of course, once you've breached the real estate company, then of course you have access to all kinds of data points, and you can get into their emails, and you can do a whole series of problematic things. So that brings me to the other sort of one of the most, I don't know, they're all bad, but this is, I think, one of the most scary of the scams. And this relates to hackers who will get in the middle of a real estate transaction and seek to interfere with your purchase of the property without you even knowing and end up with a wiring issue. So I'm going to try to play this. Let me know if you guys are hearing it or not hearing it when I start. And this doesn't always work remotely, but let's see if we can make it work.
We're not hearing anything.
Not hearing? Okay.
No. If you stop sharing and then share your screen again and click the checkbox that says include computer audio.
Oh, very
that
fancy.
Sometimes helps.
Okay, share screen. And then I click on optimize for video clip, share sound. Ooh, looks good. Okay, let's see if
share sound.
Okay.
Prepare to buy a new home.
Now?
Yep.
Money meant for the closing?
Yes.
Hijacked.
Okay, great.
The FBI telling us scammers took more than, get this, $220 million this year. Much of it diverted to China and gone forever. The investigation from CNBC's Andrea Day.
It really was a dream house, and it kind of ticked all the boxes.
It seemed too good to be true, almost. Exactly what we wanted.
With lots of space for the kids and miles of trails to explore and back, Aaron and Lindsay Fisher said yes to the $1.4 million house in Petaluma, California, and quickly put down a deposit.
Everything kind of just came together.
And right before closing, they wired the final payment from their account at Bank of America.
$921, $235, and 10 cents.
But 2 days after he wired the cash, this call from the mortgage company.
Aaron, where did you wire the money? I said, I wired the money to Wells Fargo. Aaron, we don't have a Wells Fargo account. You need to call your bank immediately. And then I called Lindsay and I said, we've been robbed.
The Fishers were hit with real estate wire fraud. Here's how it goes down. The home buyer, in this case the Fishers, is having a legitimate email conversation with a real estate agent, attorney, or someone from the mortgage or title company. That's when the scammer secretly hacks into the conversation and starts emailing from an address that looks like a real player in the deal.
All of us thought we were communicating with each other, and every time we sent an email, we were communicating with the criminals.
And he had no idea the criminals were about to go in for the kill, using that fake email address to send wiring instructions that look real. The cash Fisher thought he wired to the mortgage company got diverted instead. to this mysterious Wells Fargo account number.
So yeah, I mean, so I think you can understand why this seems like a pretty awful, awful circumstance. In this particular case, they found it early enough, they were able to undo the transaction. Unfortunately, that's pretty rare. Once the wire goes through, it's very, very difficult to undo a wire. And one of the things that most people don't know is that for wire transactions, as long as you put the wire address on there, it doesn't matter what name is on the account. So if I put a wire address and I say ABC Escrow and the account really is John Scammer, it goes to John and the bank does not check. Unlike a check that you write for $50 where the bank does check, there are special provisions for wires to make them move quickly that don't require lenders to do that kind of checking, which I think is a huge problem on the lender side. But in any case, this is a serious issue. It's happened many times. If you're going to do a real estate transaction, do not rely on an email telling you where to wire stuff. Always call your title company or your broker and confirm where the money's supposed to go beforehand. Don't be in a situation where the money is going, you're taking it on yourself. I've seen messages where they say, oh, congrats, you get your keys early. Just send your money right away. And people are all excited to get their keys early. And instead, they send their money to someone else. And then they have a loan that they are on the hook for, and it didn't go to their home. So it's a pretty devastating situation.
The American dream.
Here's another example. Are you guys still able to see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great, perfect. So this is another example. This actually is this actually is an example from the 2016 hack of John Podesta's email. So this is actually an example of somebody saying, hey, someone's got your password. You should really change it. But that's not actually what happened. So what happens is when you click on the change your password, the scammers now have your new password for your account. And then they go in, they take that information, because to change it, you have to give the old password, right? So they take your real password and then they go into your Gmail account and they change it to whatever password they want to change it to. And now they have access to all of your emails. So, and then from that, in connection with this, there was, they can then direct it and do other attacks. And this is an example. If you really look at it carefully, if you hover over it, often you'll see it's got this very strange link. This is not how a link should look if this is a real, for example, a Gmail account. But you see this tiny CC. All these things are information about where it's going, and it's not going to the legitimate company. So always be cautious if you're getting these sort of surprise out of the blue emails. Change your password. Do this. Do that. Be cautious about that. Also, this is just sort of a general one. This is the showing of full data with account information that happened online. Obviously, when you do social media or other things, you don't want to be videotaping yourself or showing any pictures of financial information or other data that people can then utilize. This was another case where a person who had worked for Celebrity posed as an Apple customer service employee and emailed a bunch of celebrities to get them to change their passwords or share them. And there were hundreds of victims who unwittingly gave passwords to the iCloud accounts. And he had taken quite a bit of money, over $325,000 in just a couple of years. This is an example of sort of a message you might get if your files are encrypted. This was called Crypto Locker. This was from a couple of years ago. There's a lot of different versions of this, but you get a notice, and a countdown clock, right? In this many hours, we're going to destroy your information, or maybe we're gonna publish your information. Maybe it was a romance scammer and they got you to give certain compromising pictures or information, and they say, we're going to send it to all your contacts. We now have everybody in your contact list, and we're going to send information to them that you don't want us to send. Or if it's a hospital, you don't have access to your patient files, which has happened for some hospitals. So what do? This is, again, if you're the employee, right, and you think, I don't want to, I love my tabs. I don't want to, turn my computer off and have these new updates, chime in. I mean, obviously, don't do that. You want to be very careful, exercise what we sort of refer to as good cyber hygiene and mitigating threats. Don't open attachments with emails for senders you don't recognize. And again, be sure it is a real sender, right? If it looks like it's Gmail, be very cautious. Is that really a Gmail email, or is that something else? Don't provide your username, password, date of birth, social security, financial data, or just any personal information in an email or to a robocall, someone on the phone. We like to say, if you wouldn't give that information to someone who showed up at your doorstep, why would you give it to somebody you've never seen on the phone or online? Like, if I walked to your door and said, hey, can you just go ahead and give me your social security number? I'm going to help you out with this. You would close the door on me. Be like, who is this person? But somehow not having people face to face, people sometimes will do that. And it's really dangerous. Also, you want to verify the web address is legitimate, right? By manually typing it. Like if there's a link and it's like, click here to get your link to Apple or to this other website, go on your own. You know how to find apple.com or whatever website you're looking for. Find it that way and then see if this really is a legitimate situation. Also check for misspellings, wrong domains. Maybe it's a government website. It should be ending with .gov, but it has a .com. Or there's a little bit of a misspell to the link. Be aware of those things. Those are signs that it's something is not quite right. You also want to secure your own workstation, right? You want to change your default login passwords and usernames regularly. Make them long and complex. I know nobody likes that, but that's, one of the problems with all the hacks that have happened is there's now sort of a database of people's passwords, right? So back in the day when there was sort of the first breaches, they were like, oh, great, we have all these passwords that common passwords people use, password 123, the name of their dog, basic things that people would use. And so what happened is once they hack in, they would just, if there's no block on the system, they just have a what's called a brute force attack, and they just roll through all those passwords to see if you may have used one of those common passwords, or maybe it was a password you used before. So that's why it's really important you keep your passwords long and complex. It can be a sentence that and it's just, you just use one letter from each of from the phrase. I love to go to the beach on the weekend. ILTG. I mean, it's so it's not a real word. And then mix in with that letters and symbols to make it something that's not going to be a common thing someone's going to come up with. Using different passwords for every account. It could be a permutation of a similar password, but you don't want to have the same password, because if somebody breaches an account and gets your password for your bank, and that's a password you use for your credit card and for everything else, they now have access to your whole life, right? So you do want to be very careful. And you want to change your passwords again. There are some password holder programs that some people like, or, there are ways that you can come up with, as I said, to kind of remember them as well. But think about that. Also, multi-factor authentication is very helpful. If you're checking it and then it comes to your phone to have you verify certain things, that's helpful because the scammers won't have that ability unless they breach your phone too, which usually they don't. It's not that complex. It could be, but you'll at least figure it out, right? If you keep getting texts and somebody else is logging into and you're not logging into your system, you'll have an indication something's wrong. And then give unpredictable answers to security questions. The name of your first dog shouldn't be Fido or Blackie or Cookie. It's whatever. It's make up a name, right? It could be, Red. Red's not an example. Maybe it's a dog's name, but something totally different, right? It could be something completely different. A mother's maiden name. Don't give them your mother's maiden name, right? Because that way, somebody who figures out your mother's maiden name now has access to your points. And there's no rule. You're as long as you can remember it, that your answer to the security question has to actually be the true answer. So something to think about that makes it harder for people who might be able to guess your information. And again, especially with social media, what we see is people are they can check your social media profile. Oh, look at my dog, John, how great he is. Oh, great. There's a security question. What's your dog's name? Oh, I just looked online and I found it, right? So you want to be careful. Again, look up phone numbers or websites of the people who are contacting you. Call them directly. If you think you're getting something from your escrow company, pick up the phone. Hey, did you actually call me with these wiring instructions? I thought I wasn't getting them until next week, right? And then figure it out. I once got a really good phishing text from AAA Insurance, and I was like, this looks like really good, but these numbers don't make sense. And I reached out, and of course it was a total scam, but it was a good one because they made me think about it for a minute. But I didn't click the link and pay my supposedly late auto insurance, which wasn't late. It wasn't the right timing. But again, if these phishing attempts are really, really good because they find out where you may bank or who you might connect with, that's an issue. Look for scam tip-offs. You don't have an account with the company. Your Bank of America checking account was breached. Well, I don't bank with Bank of America, so probably don't need to click on that. It's missing your name. There's bad grammar or spelling. It's asked for passwords. But some of them are really good, as I just mentioned, and you're not always going to be able to figure that out. Keep your computer security up to date, back up your data, consider multi-factor authentication, as we talked about. Change any compromised passwords right away. If you realize you're a victim of a breach, or if a company identifies that something's been breached, change it right away. If your credit card that you used on a breach just happened and you can come up with a new number, consider doing that. There's also software VPNs that you can do at home, and that's again going to be your internet router. You can do them where they switch, so people don't know, are not able to track you as easily. You want to keep your internet browser secure. Update all those things. Back up your data on an external drive or on the cloud in some other way, in some way that you can reliable, and then throw it out. I'm almost done. I know I'm beyond time, but should I stop, or do you guys want? I just have like 3 more minutes.
You can finish up.
Okay, I'm almost done. Again, if you run a company or you're working at a company, you want to make sure there's training and education so others are not allowing the company to be breached. Backup, as we said, plan for attacks. Be sure you have a way to do things if you do have an incident issue, and then improve your router security. You can call your company's, your internet provider, and ask them how to do that. And then if you are a victim, report phishing emails to spam@uce.gov, and then also the FTC is a good place to submit complaints. And then just watch out for malware if you're getting pop-ups, your computer's acting slow, new unexpected toolbars, and stop. If you think you're a victim of any of these, stop shopping, update your software, make sure you've got some kind of a backup, and then reach out to someone you trust for tech support, and just be cautious online. And again, one final thing I will say is just be careful with your email addresses. If you use one email that you really like and you're going to get your special reward program from the shop that you're at, maybe come up with, just make up an email that you use for your sort of junk stuff. And then if that gets breached by some, because you're handing it out more liberally, it won't get access to important data or media. So report issues, contact whoever the company is, change your passwords, watch out for signs of identity theft, and consider reporting it. So that's my presentation. I'm open for questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you so very much. As with all of our topics today, I think we could talk about cybercrime for a lot longer than 30 minutes.
Yes.
We got some great questions from all of our panelists. So at this time, I'm going to invite all of our panelists to come back on stage, onto our virtual stage, by turning the cameras back on. And I'm going to go through some of the questions that we've received and see how long that takes us, keeping an eye on the clock. So again, attendees, if you have questions, feel free to submit them into the chat window, and I'll be keeping an eye on that one. So the first one I want to ask is for our narcotics team. Someone asked, if I see someone selling narcotics, or I suspect them of selling narcotics, can I call, and will officers come out and investigate? Is that something that is still being tackled at this time?
Yes, absolutely. Call your local police station. If you're in the city of Los Angeles, call your local LAPD office, and they'll get you to the right resource. And if it's an emergency and you suspect something a little bit more serious, or you need immediate police response, always call 911.
Excellent, thank you. And maybe Dr. Puri, this isn't particularly related to narcotics, but maybe you or another of the panelists can answer. If you can talk about the rollout of 988, I think this is something new that people might benefit from hearing about, if you could share.
For sure. So 988 is our new nationwide mental health crisis line. So instead of calling 911, if it's not a life-threatening emergency, you can also call 988, which was operationalized, I actually believe, last week. And it will connect you with someone who can help with a mental health crisis. So if someone is on the street and you feel like they're acting erratically and it doesn't rise to the level of 911, you can call 988. If you yourself are having a mental health crisis, if you're having thoughts about wanting to hurt yourself or hurt someone else, you can also call 988. It's a national network, 24 hours a day, and they'll be able to kind of like provide you resources, designed, or it's going to be run by people who have had some experience with counseling. And it'll be kind of like focused mainly around national suicide prevention.
And quickly, is it a free service?
Yes, totally free.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let's jump over to Detective Cooper and Stan. The question is, are the recent rise in smash and grab robberies related to organized gangs? You're muted, Detective Cooper, sorry.
As far as the smash and grabs, there have been people that have been identified, have been arrested that are gang members, but as far as like a larger conspiracy of, you know, all the gangs meeting saying, hey, we're going to go hit Beverly Hills tonight, or we're going to go hit whatever. I haven't seen that personally. But there definitely are gangs that are involved in those types of crimes, and the follow home robberies that we've had, with the jewelry getting stolen, and it's been all over the news. Some of that is definitely involved, gang member involved.
Thank you for that. Stan, did you have anything to add there?
No, because I wouldn't really know.
Okay. How about for Christina? We have a question. You focused a lot on commercial cybercrime, but what can parents do if they discover their child is being asked to send inappropriate photos or videos to an adult predator?
Well, that should be reported as a crime, right? So, I mean, you want to be reporting that to LAPD, and they'll investigate it, or whoever the local law enforcement agency is, and then those will come over to our city attorney's office for prosecution. So definitely, you know, any targeting of children obviously is a huge issue. There are a whole series of rules about what you're able to do, especially children under the age of 13. They're not supposed to be collecting their data. There's websites and others are not supposed to be doing any of those things. So definitely reporting those things are really critical. And I think, as others said, you know, watching your kids for signs of drugs, but also keeping an eye on their, you know, what are they doing online? You know, I mean, I know kids will, you know, oh, I'm just watching this funny video. You know, you really need to be aware, you know, are people targeting them? Encourage them not to be putting their names and their information out there. I mean, it's a very scary place for children who are putting their data out there, putting their pictures out there. All of that stuff can be easily downloaded and, you know, used to target people. And so it's really, really important that people are aware and oversee their kids' social media, because there's just a lot of ways in which that can be a really dangerous thing. And parents won't know, because if they're not tracking it or watching it. And there are programs you can get that allow you to kind of have a better eye on their social media use. So you can also, you know, if you want to pay for some of those programs, you can kind of see what sites they're going to as well, without having to ask or have them handed over to you. It's just kind of a one-time install, and you can kind of, again, look at it.
I think what Art said in his presentation was best. You know, when it comes to your kids and their phones, inspect them, look at them, do the stuff that they don't want you to do. And we're dealing with it in my family. With one of my kids, it's like, nope, let me see.
Right.
And they know, the kids know that's a possibility that mom or dad's going to look at the phone and see who's this, whatever, and explain to them some of the stuff that we see. This is what happens, and this is what can happen. Airdrops, like I didn't know what that was until a couple of years ago, and a friend of ours had their daughter at Magic Mountain waiting in line, and all of a sudden started getting photos that some weirdo was just dropping on her phone. Stuff I didn't know about. So you got to educate yourself on all the technology that's out there.
Absolutely. And there's lots of things you can do with the settings to ensure there's privacy and get rid of ad tracking. And there are things you can do to really try to limit that. And, I've certainly instilled a lot of that in terms of the, I don't know, some people call it paranoia, but you're not paranoid if it's really a problem, right? So.
Absolutely. Yeah, in that vein, you mentioned, we heard in our narcotics presentation that there is a lot of narcotics distribution happening via social media apps like Snapchat. Is that what you would identify as being the primary method for our young people accessing these illicit substances at this time? Are there other ways folks are accessing these substances?
It's definitely up there in the top. Again, it's going to depend on your kid and it's not just kids, any user that's using what circle they run in, but it's way up there on the top. And then of course, you're going to have your regular associates that you deal with, the regular dealer in schools and places like that. The internet, social media though, and that includes everything, Craigslist, OfferUp, all of it. It's harder to see, you know where your kid or your loved one is going if you see them coming and going, especially if you see them coming and going and then they come back and they're under the influence or they have things that they shouldn't have. But when you don't see them coming and going and they're operating in the anonymity of the internet, that you can't control. So to me, particularly with fentanyl and overdoses, that's probably the top one.
And of course, if you happen to see that stuff online, that that these are postings on Craigslist or other places, obviously you report this, that the sites all say that they don't, they're not allowed to sell that stuff, and you can report it and they'll flag it. I know obviously you can't catch everything, but like we did that with fireworks. We sent letters. I had my investigator look into fireworks sales that were happening, and we sent letters to all the platforms, and we've seen a real decrease in the number of fireworks that are up for sale now. So it can be a slower process, but there can be sort of a back end way of at least trying to limit. And maybe it's not the exact one your kid's going to do, but getting them off the platforms is an important part of it too.
Absolutely. Detective Cooper, you were very honest about how the LAPD has changed its approach to gangs in the past. The question is, what, if anything, resulted from the LA Times article suggesting officers were improperly labeling gang membership / affiliations?
So that references to a case that was involving some officers from Metropolitan Division, where it was alleged that officers were documenting on FI cards improper information, either making stuff up or whatever. I can't talk too much about that personally because I'm involved in that case from the assignment that I was working. But as a result of, and it's not because of the LA Times article, but as a result of that investigation, we used to have a database called the Cow Gang system that's run through the Department of Justice. Been through a lot of ups and downs with it. And after going back 2 years now, it was decided that our department was no longer going to use the Cow Gang system because of inconsistencies in audits that were done and inspections that were done in verifying some of the information. So that was a decision was made 2 years ago. So, and that was the Cow Gang system was a system that would keep information, basically tattoos, photos of suspected gang members or suspected affiliates. So we don't have that system anymore. So as far as we have to use other means, if we have a description of a suspect or something like that to hopefully identify somebody, we don't have that system available to us anymore. So when people ask, hey, how many gangs do you guys have in the city of Los Angeles? I know it's right around 400, 420, somewhere in there. How many gang members? I can't tell you because it's been 2 years since we've had access to the system. So that case has resulted in us doing some retraining for everybody. In fact, starts up here in 2 weeks. We're going to start up our gang schools again with reinforcing and re-emphasizing the proper documentation, proper way to document somebody, capturing the information when contacting somebody suspected of being a gang member. So that'll be starting up here in 2 weeks. So
thank you so much.
Mhm.
Does Narcan expire? Where can we get it?
Great question. It technically has about a 3-year expiration, but we've been using expired Narcan and it seems to work just fine. In terms of where you can receive it, there's an overdose and education, naloxone education called OEND program. And I'm going to put this in the website about where you can actually get Narcan easily. You can ask for a prescription from your physician. A lot of pharmacists will hand it out if you're being prescribed an opioid. As a physician, I just co-prescribe it with anything like an opioid. If you're prescribing that, we automatically prescribe Narcan. It's covered by insurance. And so that would be kind of the easiest way to get it. You can also go to a pharmacist and ask for it yourself, or on that website that I sent out is a place where they say you can get it in public.
Do all first responders carry Narcan?
They do, yes.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
Right. We're also kind of laying groundwork for the school districts to be able to have it on campus. So we're working with LAUSD, making sure that they're trained on it, on how to use it, and then making sure they have access to it.
Thank you. Christina, there's a question here that says, what can guardians do if their child is being victimized by cyberbullying from classmates?
Oh, that's a tough one. So, I mean, I think certainly, you can talk to the school about it. Obviously, it's in a sort of a, I guess it depends really on what's being said, right? I mean, if they're making threats, obviously, then that's something that can be more reported and escalated to more of a, depending on what they are, right? I'll leave it to law enforcement, but in certain circumstances, right? If they're really making some dangerous threats, that's one thing. But, I mean, I think, connecting with the school about it is one way to address it. I mean, it's a tough issue. I mean, you can always certainly block certain people from connecting with them. But if there's online publications, you can also reach out to the providers. So California law does have some provisions about being able to know kind of what there is about you. So you could potentially try to reach out if there's something, for example, about a child on a website that shouldn't be there, then you certainly can reach out to to the website itself, especially when we're talking about children. So if there are things that are out there, you can reach out to them and work to get that removed directly with the people who have it up, and even report, in some cases, you can report to a search engine too. So there's some options out there, especially if it's being published in a larger space, but certainly something to raise with the school, I would expect. And if it's, if it's more serious, obviously report to law enforcement.
Thank you. Stan, you mentioned in your presentation that contrary to what some may believe, there is gang activity on the West Side. Would you say that it's gotten better, worse, stayed the same?
Well, it's definitely gotten better for a number of reasons. One is the West Side has been under gentrification for probably 20 or 30 years. So the cost of living on the West Side is way up. Of course, the work that we're doing plays into that, but we also have a gang injunction, at least we have, that played into that as well. So I would say it's gotten better, but we know the rest is still there. Venice, Santa Monica, Culver City, Tail, all those areas. People is going to always represent these areas, regardless on if they Venice or live in Canada. So, but yeah, I believe it's gotten better overall.
Thanks, and hopefully it'll continue to get better with the work like the work you're doing. This question maybe Dr. Puri can address, does or will Los Angeles have any safe injection sites? And maybe for Detective Stone, do they increase crime?
So Senate Bill 57 is an emergency bill that was passed both in the Assembly and the Senate. I think it was pushed back to one of the subcommittees before it goes to the governor's desk for signature. And it's a bill that would allow San Francisco City, San Francisco County, Oakland City, LA County, and LA City to do a pilot program for a safe consumption site, which would include areas where people would bring a substance that they were going to use, either inject it. In LA County, we're thinking fentanyl is now often smoked, so we need to have an area for people to do safe smoking. When that bill passes, we're in preparations to operationalize safe consumption sites throughout LA County. Knowing full well that kind of our overdoses are really centralized, both kind of like in the Skid Row area and then in the South Bay. We're trying to figure out which community organizations we can work with that already have brick and mortar buildings that could also house a safe consumption site. We have really good evidence though, and I'll talk about kind of like the research we've done around safe injection sites, is that they actually do not increase crime in areas they are. They decrease substance use in those areas, and they oftentimes see a decrease in, well, we're seeing decreases in overdoses and mortality. So we know that, you know, Canada has had them for a really long time, Portugal, areas in the Netherlands. There's also an unsanctioned site somewhere in the US that's been running for about 5 years. All of the metrics around those have not shown an increase in crime. They've actually shown a reduction in crime and a reduction in overdoses and deaths, and a kind of space to link people into kind of the level of care that they need. From a public health perspective, we're really pushing the idea of harm reduction, which is meeting patients where they are, especially those who are using substance use disorders. Sometimes they're not ready to quit, but maybe they're willing to go from injecting a substance to smoking it, which can be safer in terms of overdose, but can also be safer in terms of transmission of things like HIV and hepatitis C. So I think our kind of perspective is we know that people aren't going to stop using drugs. I think we can honestly all say that. From just a human perspective, people are curious about substances, they're curious about drugs. Sometimes they make us feel different than we want to feel. So people are going to continue to use them. We need to help them use more safely, and then try to figure out if there's ways and we can understand their relationship to that substance in order to help decrease it overall and get them back to kind of like a position in society where they're more comfortable and contributing. But we will likely have safe consumption sites probably in the fall.
Thank you. Anyone have anything to add on that?
I'll give you the other direction.
Sure.
So I agree with what the doc says. If you have a safe, and this goes back to when in the city of Los Angeles, it was a big debate. Do we hand out needles in the 80s and 90s when I was first coming on? Maybe you didn't see an increase in crime or a decrease in crime. What you did see is an increase of needles in the gutters and problems that went along with that. So if you kind of look at that issue, you probably wouldn't see an increase or a decrease right near a safe injection site because people are going to go and ingest things. And I would say certainly with regard to overdoses in that area, likely a safe injection site is going to have life-saving resources right there. Narcan, people to administer it and things like that. I do know from my experience, when you open that up though, you also open it up to the people who will not follow those rules, who won't abide by what a safe injection site is supposed to accomplish, and that will manipulate what it is supposed to provide to further the illicit or the illegal activity. And then to step away from the site, the geography of the site itself, I don't believe it would help curb the national numbers in overdoses, specifically because those overdoses are coming, particularly in Los Angeles, from illicit distribution of fentanyl and counterfeit pills, not opioids and things like that. There was a question I saw flash up briefly about, is it legal or illegal to ingest drugs and possess them in the city? So if you combine these two questions, no, it's not legal to possess most drugs that are scheduled in certain schedules. When we talk about cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, counterfeit pills, fentanyl, all of those are controlled and scheduled to the point that you cannot possess them anywhere. So I'm not sure how you would go to a safe injection site with any of those drugs and use them if you can't take them there in the first place.
Thank you. I appreciate both those perspectives. Christina, is there any recourse for folks who have been scammed out of money on dating sites?
It's a good question. So maybe the answer is maybe. So the most important thing is obviously to report, right? So you can report to the Federal Trade Commission. You can report to IC3, which is the FBI's website. I'd actually encourage you to report to both. And depending on the source of it, sometimes you can sort of trace it. One of the challenge with romance scams is there's usually a couple layers in between. So unfortunately, what happens is there's usually a series of romance scam victims. And so if I'm victim one, then somebody will have me take, somebody else as a victim, and they say, oh, well, send me my money. I'm I'm overseas. I'll send you $2,000, but I don't trust the banking here. So you send me $1,500. You get to keep the $500. And then what they send me is something that the bank accepts. It looks like it's in my account, and then it doesn't clear, right? And I then send my real legitimate $1,500 to another site, or they run money they stole from somebody else through your account. And so it becomes very complicated. Now, if you paid money through Western Union or MoneyGram, Western Union right now has a process. The FTC sued Western Union for allowing a lot of suspicious transactions to go through. The process closes pretty soon. I think you only have a couple of weeks, but if you send it through Western Union, you still may qualify for that relief. So that's depending on the process you use to send the money. Sometimes that can be a way to get it back is if you go through, like I said, there were 2 big settlements against Western Union and MoneyGram, but they're getting smarter and they're using crypto and other things, which make it much harder to trace. And then they have it roll through another Money Mules account. So you think you're sending it to someone in the US, and oftentimes it's really then going overseas to somewhere else who's not at all the person you thought. But there's a lot of ways to figure that out. You can do reverse image searches for people. I've taken text from romance scams and just put it in a search bar with quotes around it and found a bunch of people got the same wonderful love letter that you got that says the same things. But it's a very big problem, and there's people, particularly, and it's a big issue out of Nigeria, where there's one person who does all of the communications, and that person sort of gets paid the most, and then they have all these other mules that run around and collect the money and then pass it around to the people in the group.
Thank you for that. We're getting to the last few questions, but there's a topic that I think might be interesting to hear from all of the panelists. Could you describe what, if any, work you do with the schools in your area around your topics? Do you work with any of the school districts or the schools to help with the work that you're doing? I don't know who wants to take that.
I know that the helper, we are on several campuses. We do passage work around the campuses. We provide life skill impact sessions on campus with the most vulnerable students that the administrators and the superintendents have identified. Some of them is want to be in the gang life, some of them don't. A lot of these students is having some behavior challenges, some traumas that have taken place in their life growing up. Some of them fathers have been killed to gang violence. Some of them is foster, so it's a plethora. But yes, we're on campus working with that population, and we are also safe passages around the campuses that we are in partnership with.
And I can say, just be on half of operational resources for LAPD, we've got our school resource connections through the department, but then you also have the community relations office in each station, and you've got the senior lead officers that will stay connected. But that's primarily, maybe for the person that's asking that question, maybe direct that question to the school police, because they have their own school police resources that would answer all of that, and we would more or less be in a position of assisting them where that's pretty much their geography.
The public health department does a lot in terms of working with the community organizations we fund who do school-based interventions. We ourselves are doing a Narcan training for LAUSD nursing staff and then other kind of school districts in Southern California as well. But most of our prevention work comes through our prevention arm, and they're the ones who are dealing directly with the community-based organizations that are doing. Right now, I know we're doing a methamphetamine campaign for adolescents that will go into schools. And I think we're still working on campaigns around Narcan and opioids for high school. So those are kind of the ways we're doing it.
Any other thoughts about working with schools?
I can just say specifically, like in my unit, we don't particularly do that, but we do have our gang units will go out and do stuff in the schools when they're invited, talk to kids, give presentations. I know out in Foothill Division, they were doing some stuff with the schools where one of the detectives would go out and talk about, hey, this is what you need to watch out for and stuff to look out for. You know, just kind of a heads up kind of thing. But it's specifically my unit. We don't do that. We're not involved in that stuff.
Well, thank you. Christina, there was a question that came in. Can you describe what IP spoofing is and how we can protect ourselves from IP spoofing?
Sure. So, it's when somebody tries to pretend to be a different, internet provider. So it's you think you're going to apple.com and you're really going to a different version of it. And so it's just a spoof of sort of the link. And so you just want to be very careful when you're checking websites. You know, what some companies will do is they'll actually buy the misspelled versions of their website. But they don't always get them all. And so, or some don't do it at all. And so you'll see somebody who will be impersonating, for example, there's some, if you look for California DMV, you'll find a bunch of stuff that's got DMV in it or California DMV, and it's slightly different, and it'll be like a traffic school site or something else, but it looks suspiciously similar. And again, I'm not saying that is a particularly shady one, but there are ones that are like that. Or I got a complaint once from somebody who clicked on a link and they thought that it was a legit crypto link, and it wasn't. It was a spoof version of a company that they thought they were going to be doing a crypto transfer through, and then they gave their money to a scammer. So you just want to be careful that the link that you're looking at is a real legitimate one.
Thank you for that. All right, so last two questions. Last question is going to be, because I liked Stan's sharing earlier, share a success story. So not a question, I guess, a prompt. Share a success story from you or your team, because we have so many people on this call or who are going to watch this recording that are doing great work in our neighborhoods. And you're obviously amazing professionals in what you do. And I think that it would be a great way to inspire us as we end this presentation. But just before we get to that question, so y'all can think about that, I have a question for our narcotics team, which is, can you address how drugs enter the border illegally, or sorry, how drugs are brought over via the border illegally, if that is a problem?
Yeah, it's one of the primary trafficking methods, being a border state. It comes over, we've all seen those movies where people are doing what's called body packing, where they're putting smaller quantities of drugs and even drug money going both directions, and crossing the border at the pedestrian crossings. Primarily, it's in passenger vehicles with hidden compartments. And you could, anybody can Google that, you can see what that's all about. But it's a constant flow of drugs coming in, and it's only limited to the imagination of the trafficker, how they put it in traps and how much goes in there. We've had cases where 2,500 kilos of cocaine, if everybody knows what a oil car looks like on a freight train with those curved ends on it, they cut off the ends of the curved ends, put 2,500 kilos in each end of those, and it was passing unimposed through the rail system, through trade agreements and whatnot. Commercial trucking is huge with some of the express lanes, and then you get down to the passenger vehicles. Passenger vehicle can carry 40 pounds, 50 pounds of methamphetamine, very easily hidden. Hundreds of thousands of counterfeit pills, kilos of cocaine. So it's a big problem.
Thanks for sharing that. So let's start with Dr. Puri. Can you share a success story from your work that we could leave with today?
Yeah, so before I came to public health, I was one of the clinical attendings at LA County USC, both on the addiction service and running the inpatient adolescent unit. So this kind of like parallels both of that. But what we saw a lot of times is kids coming in overdosed or coming in kind of intoxicated with a substance they A, didn't realize that they were going to take, or B, tried to hurt themselves to do. We started seeing a lot of this happen, especially with the Department of Children and Family Services. So we created partnerships with DCFS to make sure that kids who have high risks of substance use disorder within their families or within themselves have kind of a quick pathway to residential or higher level outpatient treatment. We ourselves developed policies and procedures around getting medications and therapy for these very, very high risk kids. And we've actually seen a really good success rate in terms of the 7 kids that we've kind of watched really carefully. None of them have overdosed. And that's been in the past 6 months, which I mean, that's huge for me. If we can help as many kids as we can, that's great. And it's these small victories that I think carry us forward.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can we jump to you, Stan, to share a success story?
Yeah, another just thinking about, we work with the Office of Violence Prevention up in the Antelope Valley, and we do some work around the schools there. But we was at a board meeting Wednesday, and several of the students came out to support the work that we do at a middle school. And one of the young guys that I have personally been supporting since elementary lost his mom. You would think this guy would be in a gang. You would think he would just be giving up on life. But he had mentioned that he's 10 credits away from graduating. So I'm like, well, what grade are you in? I mean, I'm a sophomore. I'm like, wow. There was a teacher in the audience who remembered from middle school. And this young got kicked out of all the schools. And nobody knew why he was acting the way he was acting. He actually lost his mother. And so when she came out of the board meeting, she said, "Is that you, Malik?" He said, "Yeah." And she broke down in tears, man, just to hear testimony. A lot of times these young people carry their pain because they don't feel that they have the right audience to talk to. And being a mentor, you have to be willing to listen to these stories. But when she came on and said, "Man, this guy here, when I tell you," I already knew what kind of kid he was. I mean, I saw the leadership in elementary, but she said, "When I tell you, man, the way he used to respond to everybody, it was just a negative." But he spoke to the board, Eastside Youth School District, Wednesday night. And he's a sophomore with only 10 credits left to graduate high school. He's a father. He has a daughter, but he had made a 360. So I want to give a shout out to Malik tonight or this evening, and that's a success story.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Detective Cooper, you have something to share for us?
I have a lot of stories, but I mean, a lot of success stories. I want to say probably the biggest thing that's impacted me is by working the different things that I've worked and meeting a lot of different people in law enforcement from different agencies, locally, state, federal, internationally. When we have cases come up where I'm able to put 2 people together who normally wouldn't know each other, instead of, just cold calling some department or, just totally blind call, being able to, hey, call this guy, give him a heads up, kind of connect these 2 and get all the dots connected. And it's resulted in some pretty big cases where some some bad people have gone to jail that deservedly so. They were involved in some pretty bad stuff. And so that kind of, even though I wasn't there, wasn't my case, I kind of helped out with stuff. Not getting all the glory or anything like that, but just things like that. I mean, there's a lot of success stories that Art can tell you too, stuff that he's been involved in that never going to be in the headlines. You're never going to hear about it, never going to see anything on the news about it. But at the end of the day, hey, I did a good job and I did my part. So yeah, that's probably the best I can describe as far as a success story. So.
No, I appreciate that. I put you all on the spot with this prompt. Christina, can we jump to you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would just say probably over the years, I've had a lot of different cases where we get to give consumers restitution, which is great. We had some cases where people were being ripped off with the financing program and were about to lose their homes, and we were able to kind of address that and help them stay in their homes, which was fantastic. On a smaller victory on the cyber side. So I mean, over the years, I've had sort of hundreds of millions I've been able to give back. So it's always nice to send people surprise checks. But on the cyber side, I had a victim who kind of found me out of nowhere, a senior citizen, and he would call me and he would tell me, I lost all this money, this lottery scheme, and they keep calling me and they keep telling me I won the lotto. And I said, did you play the lotto in Canada? Didn't play the lotto, you didn't win the lotto. And by the way, if you win the lottery, there's one thing nobody does, ask you for money. That's not how lotteries work. So you didn't play it, means you didn't win it. And also, if you're getting money, nobody needs to ask you for the taxes in advance. None of that stuff works. So I ultimately found a way, because he had sent a bunch of money through one of the Western Union MoneyGram programs. So I was actually able to connect him with that. And I think he got somewhere around $80,000 back, which was a big deal for him. So so that was sort of a kind of a small victory, but one of those things where I was able to, I think, make a big impact. And so we do a lot of that kind of every day with the financial fraud that happens, where people really lose large amounts of money that they just don't have the ability to lose, right? Especially people who are low income and who have, well, somebody told me they were coming to my house and they were going to do this renovation, and they put this loan on my house and now I'm going to lose it. And so really working with lenders and others and the financiers and getting people to say, is that, do you really want to go to the court and tell them that this person lost their house after I have this really great story? And so being able to really protect people from those situations has been a real pleasure, especially when people are in bad situations, which a number of our victims often are.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Detective Stone, you want to take us home?
Yeah, and Ryan hit it right on the head. But, you just think about the panelists that you have here, what the doctor had to say. I'm sitting here listening to this, and I'm thinking of dozens of things that hit me that I couldn't even tell you because I wouldn't get through it without getting choked up. But I'll go a different route. And this is the whole positive side of law enforcement. I had a detective, now a detective, who's a young police officer that came to me when I was running the interstate international trafficking side of this squad that I'm doing. And she shared with me the whole reason she came on the job was, we all remember when Los Angeles was handing out baseball cards and cops were running around and just flinging them out the window at everybody. She stopped, and this happened to be the DARE edition of the baseball cards to keep it kind of narcotics related. Officer had no reason to stop, probably really busy, just got out and saw this little girl standing on the sidewalk and went and gave her a DARE card and took a picture with her. And here she is. I think it was probably, well, it had to be at least 21 years later. She's working for me. And I asked her, why did you come on the job? And she pulled out that card. She carries it with her at work every day and said, because this officer took the time to stop, and that's all I wanted to be. And it was just this little girl that was barely knee high to him, but it just lasted her whole life. And that's always touched me. And she's gone on to be an exceptional officer. I can't tell you the ways she's contributed and helped the communities in Los Angeles.
That's fantastic. Thank you all so very much. I can't say enough about our panelists for giving their time on this Saturday. Thank you to all our attendees for being here. I think Detective Cooper said it really well when when he said, this is about connection, right? We have 99 neighborhood councils in the city of Los Angeles, and the Congress is all about bringing us together. We brought some great panelists together today. We brought some great neighborhood councils together today, and that's what we're going to keep doing. So we're going to have another workshop in August about event planning for neighborhood councils. And then we have our big annual conference on September 24th. So this was just a preview of what's to come. We look forward to seeing y'all next time. And that's it for today. So please join me in a virtual round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all so very much. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.